to the NXT Podcast, your home for weekly NXT reviews and insight.
The beautiful part of NXT is that when one dream ends, another dream begins.
Find all of your NXT news, recaps, and analysis right here. So with that being said, we only have one question for you.
Are you ready?
We thought so. Let's get the show started right now.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the NXT Podcast. As always, I am your host. My name is Zachary Smith. Before we get started, you can always find me over on Twitter. I am at ZachNXT. That's at ZACHNXT. Sorry for missing the show last week. It was a hell of a week, and didn't get a chance to record for you. Sorry about that. First show that I've missed. I don't intend to miss any more. Now, we had New Year's Evil this week. The NXT show that's really just an NXT show. It's halfway between maybe a regular NXT and a takeover. And generally they do this when something big is happening on AEW and they need to counter-program it, if we're being honest with ourselves. And because they do that, we got a very good episode of NXT. There was no more real setups. It was all action and the culmination of the stories that they've been telling. So we have a lot of fun stuff to talk about. I have something not as fun to talk about at the beginning. As you know, generally we will cover the news and notes in the wrestling world. But that doesn't feel like it would be genuine given the current circumstances that we have. I said this on Twitter, and you can see over there that I had a lot of tweets that were quoted and favorited and jumped in on a couple of things. And I said on Twitter that I have stayed away from talking specifically about politics on this show. And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, this isn't a political podcast. This is a wrestling podcast. And I am not an expert on political matters. Also, I understand that shows like this one are an escape for people. This is a place where you can come to just have fun for an hour or so and talk about what is generally a really good wrestling show. And so for those reasons, I've stayed away from things like politics. I can't do that now because of a few reasons. There's been a lot of terrible things going on for a while now. In fact, for about 4 years. I remember that my grandmother passed away in 2009, I believe. And before she passed, she was able to see the results of the election, and she was able to see that Barack Obama was going to become our next president. And I remember my grandmother crying because she was so happy that he had won. And she was very invested in Barack Obama winning, as I was, as my family was. And it was a beautiful moment. And I remember when she passed, one of the things that my mom and I talked about is at least she got the chance to see that. This is a woman and my grandmother that marched in one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s marches and was a big proponent of things like the Southern Poverty Law Center and was big on seeing Barack Obama become president. And it was part of that history-making moment. I am very glad that my grandmother lived to see Barack Obama become president of the United States. I am also glad that she did not get the chance to see Donald Trump become president of the United States. I think that too often people boil this down to just thinking that people don't like Donald Trump because he is a truth speaker or because people just don't like Republicans and they often feel persecuted. And that's not it. It's that in addition to not at all being qualified or particularly interested in anything out of pettiness in becoming president, that we've been in a tailspin for about 4 years. We've been, at best, an embarrassment for 4 years. And now we're going to have a new president in Joe Biden. And Joe Biden being president isn't going to fix all of the problems that we have in this country. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time, and frankly, it shouldn't, because we shouldn't have these problems. That's an obvious thing to say, but it's a small step. And Joe Biden won handily and won more than the 270 required electoral votes to become president. And rather than accepting that as invariably all unsuccessful presidential nominees do and concede, Donald Trump took it upon himself to create a narrative that no sane person would entertain, that the election was rigged. And I was leading in all of these states, and then all of a sudden, the votes flip by hundreds of thousands. I would argue that has more to do with him telling people not to vote by mail, and so any of his supporters that would have didn't, and so a lot of the mail-in votes came back for Joe Biden. That's generally how votes work. You count them and then see how many you counted. But he pushed this false narrative, basically trying to temper tantrum his way into another 4 years. And a big part of that was him saying that, him and his supporters were going to march down the street and not accept the results of this election. And then yesterday, his followers and the members of his cult took him up on that offer and stormed the Capitol building while they were going to, amongst other things, be certifying the results of the election, which for some time now we have known the outcome of. And people who are desperate for him to have 4 more years, not clearly having not gone through what all of us went through, held on as tight as they could to this fantasy that either Vice President Pence or somebody was going to overturn this fraudulent election that was in no way fraudulent. And a big old group of idiots stormed the Capitol building and hang out in Nancy Pelosi's office, would steal her mail, basically ransacked the place. Now, I don't know what their goal here was. Presumably it was to stop them from certifying the results or having their voices heard, and we've heard them. You won't shut up. We're just ignoring you because the adults are talking. And I would assume that was their goal, except for the fact that they just came back and met after the rioters were dispersed. And I very intentionally use the word rioters because, starting with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, people started protesting. And I was at several of those protests. My wife and I and friends of mine were at those protests. And I intentionally use the word protest there because in every protest that I had been to or that I have seen, they are peaceful. They are people exercising their right as an American to have their voice be heard. And there were marches and speeches, and there wasn't violence. In fact, the only time there was any violence was by members of the police, who took it upon themselves to beat or rubber bullet, which is a lot worse of a thing than it sounds like it is, or generally attack American people. And peaceful protests are wonderful. Unless you have a police force that is only interested in having people shut up and not addressing any of the problems that it has. This was not a peaceful protest. This was a riot. This was intended to be harmful. There were people that had zip ties and other gear that would indicate that perhaps a kidnapping was going to be afoot, but they're so unorganized and generally stupid that they couldn't even quite figure that out. It seems like a bunch of idiots that got a 24-pack of Coors Light and sat in the back of their pickup truck and said, what we should do is storm the Capitol building. And let's be honest, they didn't know the name. They said that big building where the traitors are. And then they didn't think it through any further because they're stupid. This was a riot. And it is of note that, generally speaking, when there were peaceful protests for Black Lives Matter, it was a lot of black people. There were white people too, but a lot of black people. And because it was a lot of black people, the police decided to answer peaceful protests with violence in a lot of cases. Unwarranted. This was a group of white people, mostly and overwhelmingly, as you would expect. Point being that, one, it seems like it shouldn't be that easy to break into the Capitol building. I would have more trouble stealing a article of clothing from the mall than apparently I would storming the Capitol building. It doesn't seem like that should be the case, but clearly it is. Also, on the news, they indicated that at 6 p.m. there was going to be a curfew. They generally will do that when they want protesters, or in this case, rioters, to disperse. Obviously, these people did not heed that. So, there is a curfew at 6 o'clock, and then police lined up outside with their riot shields, and then they stood there. And they stood there. And they stood there. And they stood there. It was not until about 7:25 p.m., an hour and 25 minutes later, when the police had just been standing out there, just twiddling their thumbs, or helping people down the stairs, or letting them in through the gates even on video, that they finally, very slowly and very calmly, and I would argue very respectfully, tried to disperse the protesters. There was a lot of announcements. There was a lot of inching toward. There was not a lot of people being beaten with batons or shot with rubber bullets or shot with real guns. Wasn't a lot of that. That's interesting because I feel like if that had been a Black Lives Matter peaceful protest and there had been people doing something similar to what these people were doing, which is reenacting standing on George Floyd's neck on the steps of the Capitol building, those steps and that street would have been red with the blood of those protesters. And as far as I can tell, the only difference between these rioters and the peaceful protesters is that a lot of the protesters were black and a lot of the rioters were white. And as far as I can tell, that's one of the two major differences. The other difference being that these people were out to destroy and protesters were out to have their message heard. Donald Trump had a video which lukewarmly urged people to go home, while simultaneously telling them that they were special and we love you. I don't know why, when it's a Black Lives Matter protest, you call them either thugs or rioters and say that they should be locked up. And then when a bunch of white people do it and it happens to be in your favor, you tepidly say, go home, guys, but I love you, you're very special. And again, the only reason I can think that that would be happening is because white people were doing it, and they were doing it for Donald Trump. And please make no mistake that he has given every indication that he wanted this. He wanted to take 4 more years of being the president of the United States by force. Now, bear in mind, he did not want to do it himself. He's not big on working on his own. Work ethic is not a thing that I would ascribe to him, but he does want his people to do it for him, but not have to take any of the blame, so that he can sit back and say, I didn't know that was going to happen, even though I have given these people that are already unstable and not smart, to say it as very kindly as I can, because I cannot curse on this show, all of the ammunition, metaphorical and literal, that they need to go through with something like this, because I want to intimidate and strong arm and push people to do what I want, because all that he has ever been in his life is a bully, and that's his really only skill. That's how he has gotten what he wants, and he thinks that will work with the United States of America. And to be fair to him, we did make him president, so I guess it kind of does. So our president incited a dangerous riot. One of them was shot. And when people were posting about getting justice, say, for Breonna Taylor, there was a lot of sentiment that came back from the All Lives or Blue Lives Matter crowd. As a quick aside, blue lives aren't a thing, that's a job. But when Breonna Taylor was killed, there was a lot of pushback on, well, the boyfriend, this and that. When this white woman was killed during a riot, a dangerous riot with terrible intentions, those same people posted that this is ridiculous, it's a miscarriage of justice, her name was this, and she needs justice. And I saw a lot of people push back saying, well, she was killed during a dangerous riot. If she had just done what she needed to do, this wouldn't have happened. And a person died, and I'm never going to celebrate that, but I certainly did celebrate the pushback, because black people were literally just peacefully protesting, saying, please don't kill us. And your response was, all lives matter, or blue lives, again, a job matters. And if you're interested, by the way, they came right back at about 8:30, and early in the morning, this morning, certified the election results. I believe Joe Biden ended up with something like 306 electoral votes. So for all of the lawsuits that Donald Trump and Giuliani put out, Joe came out with the same number, if not more, votes on recounts. They tried their best to delay this and have the facts come out, and they were very fond of saying this election was rigged and everyone knows it without providing any evidence. The point is that Joe Biden's going to be the 46th president of the United States, and I understand it's not going to fix everything. But at least I can now say that I have a president that categorically does not accept rioters and immediately went on television before the actual president and condemned it. I will no longer, on the 20th, have a president that incites riots. I can only hope that sincere justice comes to Donald when he's done being president for everything he's done while being president, not the least of which inciting a riot on the Capitol building because he's a giant baby throwing a temper tantrum. And as a final aside, this is what happens when during a debate, the President of the United States, when asked to condemn white supremacists, tells a group affectionately known as the Proud Boys, because they name themselves like 12-year-olds in a treehouse, to, quote, stand back and stand by, unquote. Now, I don't know what you thought he meant when he said that, but it sure does sound like the kind of thing you would say to people if you had an idea for later. And this is what happens when you have a president that seems cool with being on good terms with white supremacists. So, unfortunately, if you were a fan of this and you think that this was a fraud election, I really hate to say it. You're an idiot, or you're blind, or you just don't like people. And if your taxes were better, I'm so very happy for you. But while your taxes have been better, we've become a laughingstock, and deservedly so. I don't have sympathy for you. I sincerely hope that these next 4 years are terrible for you. And I hope that every day you're reminded that you helped create a monster. Because you did. Stand back and stand by. With that out of the way, I'm going to transition flawlessly into talking about wrestling now. We are here for New Year's Evil from the Capitol Wrestling Center, and our first shot is Dexter Lumis in his regular attire. He's at ringside by himself. There's nobody there. He's walking around, and he eventually finds the control center. He hits one button on the panel, and it turns on the spotlights. He turns them back out. He pulls a big on-off switch, which starts the show, and suddenly he's in a suit jacket. Video comes on. Fans are here. The crowd is out too. Does that mean that switch also controls the presence of the audience and the announcers? If he hadn't flipped the switch, would there be any wrestlers here? Is Dexter Lumis creating all this? Like if Dexter hadn't been there that day, there just wouldn't have been a show? Because he flipped that switch and people came out, which is interesting. We're starting with Damian Priest, who is just going to be destroyed by Karrion Kross, bless his heart. And Karrion Kross is out next with Scarlett. As I always say, this is a very cool entrance. It's by far the coolest part about a character. They really, really, really want to be cool, but does not come across as cool until it's time for that entrance. Again, that is not a judgment on Karrion Kross the man. That is a judgment on how his character is written. This is Karrion's first real match back in NXT after being injured and having to relinquish the NXT title a while back. He had done a squash match or two, but this is the real thing. It's a big deal. So Damian Priest is getting more offense in this match than you would think going in, but it makes sense that you'd want this to be competitive. Having someone that just destroys everyone can be boring. That gets boring very quickly. I like that I know that Karrion Kross is going to win, but it is still a very competitive match, which makes sense as Priest is a big guy in NXT. It would make sense. The only other person that's been competitive with Karrion Kross was, in fact, Keith Lee in that NXT title match, and that match got ruined when Karrion Kross got hurt. They kind of had to limp to the finish, but I like putting him in legit matches with legit guys. It just makes him look better than any squash match would. At this point, while they're both down on the mat, I notice that Damian Priest has either drawn on or has shaved into his head an arrow into the side of his head. And boy, that's weird. He's the Archer of Infamy. It's one of his nicknames. It's not a great nickname. Yeah, and so he has an arrow on the side. I don't have a joke to add to that because the whole thing is the joke. So Karrion Kross finally picks up the win. He got his butt kicked for a good bit of that match. Karrion Kross basically just clubs Damian Priest in the back of the head, and that's enough to pick up the win. So, a successful re-debut for Karrion Kross. He came through in a big match, one of the biggest matches that he's had in NXT, simply because it was his first real match back, and he and Damian Priest delivered. So the Dusty Classic, the tag team tournament, is back. Looks like it's going to be Adam Cole and Roderick Strong representing the Undisputed Era. And we have out next Gran Metalik with Lince Dorado. He's going to be challenging Santos Escobar for the Cruiserweight title. Now, the Cruiserweight title, as always, is always a really, really good match that I really, really don't feel invested in. I don't know if it's because they don't treat it like it's important or just that the cruiserweight style is just the WWE style now. But whatever it is, I can't get into it, and that's a shame because purple is my favorite color, and that's the color the belt is. So you would think it would work, but it didn't. No. Blah, blah, blah. Santos Escobar picks up a surprisingly clean win, and he retains that cruiserweight title. Didn't need much help at all from his boys, whose names I don't remember. Sorry. As always, the cruiserweight match was really good, and it didn't feel like it mattered very much, and that sucks. We cut from that to Rhea Ripley doing push-ups and lifting weights backstage. It seems like that would tire you out, but I'm also very much not a man that works out, and Rhea Ripley very much is a person that does. So what the hell do I know? There's a quick video of Mercedes Martinez basically confirming that she's going to be the next person to challenge Io Shirai for the women's title. And I echo my sentiments that I feel so great for Mercedes Martinez that she opted out of the dumb Retribution story on Raw that is dying a slow death every week. And she got to whoever makes decisions and said, I don't want to do this. This is stupid. Got back to NXT and is actually going to be a person that is taken seriously. That's fantastic. Now, if we can just do that for the rest of the members of Retribution. Mustafa Ali can go interviews all he wants talking about there's a deep meaning behind Retribution and people only focus on the masks all he wants, but the only background information that is good about Retribution came from a Twitter thread explaining why every member of Retribution joined, which was not done by any of the members of Retribution. It was a random Twitter person. And then the members of Retribution found it and basically said, yeah, that's what it was. Not that there was no thought put into this whatsoever. It's actually very deep and symbolic. It's not. It's just bad. But Mercedes Martinez got out. Xia Li is out next with Boa, and there's a person sitting in a chair with a mask that kind of looks like Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat and is very intimidating. Her opponent is Katrina Cortez. She's a masked woman who's already in the ring. And it feels weird to have an enhancement match on a big, almost takeover-like show. Like, it's good for Xia Li. This is the first time we've seen her in the ring. We've seen a couple of videos. But it feels not important because this opponent didn't even get an entrance. Xia Li beats up Katrina and then kicks her in the face and pins her. Katrina got no offense in. This new character is very cool. I'm interested to see where it goes, but this meant nothing as a match. Very cool character, very cool entrance. I want to see more. That's where we are. Regal comes on to the screen and he says that Timothy Thatcher basically is injured and he isn't cleared for the Fight Pit match. He says when Thatcher is healthy, Ciampa and Thatcher will have their Fight Pit match. I don't remember seeing reports that Thatcher was injured. It's been a hell of a week, so I could have just missed it. It is weird to not tell me that until the show is happening. Feels like that's a thing you would announce maybe before the show, but not maybe the best business practice to change one of your big matches halfway through the show. But okay. I hope Timothy Thatcher's okay. I'll be excited to see the Fight Pit when it actually happens. So, unfortunately, there's no Ciampa Thatcher. That was one of the matches I was most looking forward to. It does seem weird if he really is injured. You saw Thatcher in, like, the background where Regal was, like, getting checked out by one of the trainers or something. It would seem like if he was legitimately injured, he wouldn't have come down to the show, or he would be at home. So it's just kind of weird. Like, I don't know if he's really hurt, or if they didn't have time to put on the Fight Pit match, or what happened. But if he is injured, I hope he gets back soon so we can see that match. If he's not injured, I'd love to know why the match isn't happening and why they waited until the literal middle of the show to tell me. Seems like that's the kind of thing you would at the least announce before the show or tell me at the beginning of the show. I don't know. We cut from that to a Bronson Reed interview. Basically, he says he's mad and he's putting this whole place on notice. And then he hypes up the last woman standing match, and then it cuts over to Rhea Ripley making her entrance. So their last match was really good, and this is also going to be really good, I bet. And Raquel Gonzalez is out next. I don't know why, but this feels like it may very well be Rhea's last match in NXT. Like, I know she's going to lose this match because she won the first time these two fought, and it would be weird to have Raquel lose twice to Rhea. But at this point, it occurs to me there's not much left for Rhea to do. So Rhea's already been NXT Women's Champion. That should have been a longer run, but they decided the best way to pump up these wrestlers in ratings was to have Charlotte Flair be the Women's Champion. And that went over like a lead balloon. And then she didn't get the opportunity to get that title back or really ride the momentum that she had that was, frankly, derailed. So she's already been Women's Champion. Her and Io had a match not but a couple weeks ago. That was an excellent match. It was one of my favorite matches in a while. So Io beat her barely, but she beat her. So Mercedes Martinez is the next person getting a women's title shot. It's not going to be Rhea for a while, but she's worked with mostly everybody on that roster, so she won't be challenging for the women's title. So it kind of seems like Rhea doesn't have anything left to do in NXT, so it makes me think that she's going to lose and just move on. So I can only hope that they don't ruin Rhea Ripley on the main roster, which is a legitimate fear for any NXT call-up. It's a weird dichotomy because on one hand, when somebody gets called up or called over to Raw or SmackDown, I'm very excited because it's an opportunity for them to get seen by more people. It gives them new people to work with, and there's a lot of exciting opportunity. On the other hand, it's much more likely that they'll come out, they'll completely ignore their history, they'll change the character for no discernible reason, and then because they change the character just to something worse, the 117,000 writers they have on staff and Vince McMahon will just say, oh, we don't have anything for this character, instead of, trying to think of an idea. And so they get stagnant, and if they're lucky, they come back to NXT, or if they're not lucky, like say an Aleister Black, you have your character change for the much worse, and then they just don't put you on TV because they don't know what to do with you, even though the reason they don't know what to do with you is because they made you less interesting, and then get mad at you for not being interesting because it's your fault you didn't buy into this bad idea we had. And then also your wife gets fired, but that's part of it. So it seems like there's been more failures than successes on call-ups. Now, Rhea Ripley is so talented that I think that she's going to be fine, but I'm also not 100% confident in that. I'm 100% confident that Rhea Ripley has more than enough skill and more than enough it factor, which is very important to them, to be one of the biggest stars on either brand. I am not nearly that confident that the people running Raw and or SmackDown are going to be able to put her in a position to do that. Or they will at first, and then she'll gradually decline. So again, it's just a legitimate fear that I have anytime somebody's going to get called up. So they're fighting, they fight their way backstage, and Dakota Kai runs in from the side hallway, and she wails on Rhea with a kendo stick a bunch of times. They really like their kendo sticks on NXT. Rhea fights back, and she starts hitting both Raquel and Dakota, and she runs Dakota Kai into these these 4 lockers, one's like 2 stacked, there's 2 rows stacked of 4 lockers in the back. And Rhea literally shoves Dakota Kai into one of the lockers and then puts a road case in front of that locker to block her in. That is great, and I love it. She shoved another grown adult into a locker. That's always going to be funny to me because I'm a little bit of a child. So Rhea walks back to the entrance ramp, and by this point, Raquel's recovered, and she hits her with a chair. They go back and forth. They bring the ring steps up to the entrance ramp, and they're fighting. Raquel ends up getting on top of the stairs, and she hits... I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be a chokeslam or if it was supposed to be that one shoulder, like one arm power bomb that she does. I think it might have been that, but she didn't quite get her all the way up for it. Not sure. Either way, she hits what looks like basically a chokeslam from those ring steps onto the entrance ramp. And when she hits it, they both go through the entrance ramp a bit into what ends up being kind of a pit. So the ref starts their count. Remember, this is a last woman standing match, so anytime one or both people are down, one or both people are down, nailed it, the ref starts counting. If the ref gets to 10 and both of you are down, it's a draw. If the ref gets to 10 and one of you is standing, the person standing wins. So Raquel climbs out of the pit, having delivered the move, and she gets to her feet, and the ref hits 10, and obviously Rhea Ripley doesn't get up by the count of 10. So, as we thought, Raquel's beaten Rhea. If that was Rhea's last match in NXT, the last few matches she had was a fantastic women's title match with Io Shirai that was one of the best finishes that I have seen in I do not know how long. It was just perfect, just barely beating the 10 count in getting back on the ring, exhausted, and then out of nowhere, Io hits the moonsault to pin her. Protected both of them. And then she had this great series of matches with Raquel Gonzalez. She had the big spot at the end. It's might be the most memorable image singularly from the show. So if Rhea is done in NXT, she will never hear this, but thank you for everything, Rhea. I know that she has put her body on the line more than most, it seems like. She's given a lot to NXT. She's meant a lot to NXT, and she's got megastar written all over her. So I'm excited, if this is her last match in NXT, to see what she's able to do on Raw or SmackDown. I feel like Raw for Rhea Ripley. I feel like you have Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair, who will be your women's champion next, I think, on SmackDown. I think Rhea can do some damage on Raw. It just occurred to me that Charlotte Flair is also on Raw. I would love to not see them do anything together anytime soon, but I think it feels like Raw for Rhea Ripley, and I sincerely wish her the best. She has all of the tools you look for in somebody to be the kind of star that you can build a brand around, and I hope that they do that the way that NXT did. So, again, that was a really great match. Their first one was really good. I feel like this one was even better. So it is now time for your main event. Kyle O'Reilly is out first, followed by Finn Balor. It is really good to see Finn back and getting in the ring. There was a stretch of time after he got injured where you didn't know what was going to happen with Finn. For a while there, they were basically taking a wait-and-see approach because he had to have surgery on his jaw that was broken in 2 or 3 places. So for a little bit there, you weren't sure if Finn was going to have to relinquish the NXT title like Karrion Kross did before him. If he had to, Karrion Kross would have won the title, gotten injured in the match where he won and had to relinquish it, and then Finn Balor would have gotten injured in his first title defense and had to relinquish it, which would have been bad. But Finn was able to heal up in time for this match. He was able to get back on TV and cut promos. They kept him away from any physicality until he was 100% ready to go, and he was able to have the rematch with Kyle O'Reilly. Now, Kyle O'Reilly is not going to win this match, but it is probably going to be a great match, just like the first one was. And I wasn't wrong. They got a lot of time, which was necessary for two wrestlers like this. Them, Johnny Gargano, Ciampa, probably Io Shirai, Rhea Ripley, are all the kind of wrestler that a lot of times they need more time in their matches because they're all really good storytellers in the ring. And so like Johnny was quoted as saying that he doesn't like matches that are short because he likes time to tell a story. And Finn and Kyle, I feel like, are both like that. Adam Cole as well, where the longer the match goes on to a point, the better it is because you've given them plenty of time to tell the story they want to tell. And Kyle and Finn absolutely had the time they needed, and they put on a fantastic match. At the end, Finn gets something of a chokehold, almost a chicken wing on Kyle, and Kyle has no choice but to tap out. This was excellent. Finn is bleeding quite a bit. He has a cut, looks like right above his left eyebrow, because these dudes like to hit each other really hard. That's their MO. I'm glad nobody, I don't think, was hurt, and I'm glad that this was an excellent match. Now, I look forward to Finn getting some other people to work with. Pete Dunne was looking on in this match. I would very much like to see Finn Balor, Pete Dunne right now, please. Pete Dunne is shredded. This is my weekly reminder to you that Pete Dunne is ridiculously shredded, and Pete Dunne could be a great opponent for Finn Balor. I just really would love to see that match because I don't think I have before, and get some new people in to challenge Finn. Presumably at some point you're going to have to deal with Karrion Kross challenging for the NXT title. I'm just not a big fan of the character, so I don't necessarily need to see Karrion Kross as NXT champion. But in fairness to the person, there's unfinished business there, and I certainly don't think it's fair to have an injury completely take that away. But Finn Balor's just a much more interesting NXT champion. It's a better character than Karrion Kross is, but hopefully we can get more defenses in before we have to deal with the Karrion Kross thing. You can keep sending Karrion Kross after different people, have Finn Balor go after Pete Dunne, and do it that way. The ref goes to hand the belt to Finn, and Finn says, "Put the effing belt in my hands." Says that twice, and then the ref obliges. And the other members of Undisputed Era come out and are kind of checking on Kyle, and Finn just kind of stares Kyle down and the other members there. Some people thought that they were laying it on really thick with Adam Cole, heaping praise on Kyle O'Reilly and saying the NXT title was coming to the Undisputed Era, and people thought that Adam Cole was going to turn on Kyle O'Reilly. And that would have worked, but then you have to deal with like who goes with who stays with Kyle O'Reilly, who goes with Adam Cole. And then for the Dusty Classic, Roderick Strong and Adam Cole can be good guys, and if you want to turn them there, you can. So I didn't really think that Adam Cole was going to turn on him. I mean, they certainly laid a lot of groundwork that indicated that that's what was going to happen. But for some reason, I just didn't see them pulling the trigger on it for whatever reason. It turns out I was right, I guess. That's not bragging. I'm guessing just like you are. But it does feel like something's going to happen with Undisputed Era. I was of the opinion that Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly, maybe Roderick Strong, were the ones that paid to have Adam Cole attacked. I guess it would be Roderick Strong and Bobby Fish were the ones that had Adam Cole attacked, and that there was going to be a split in the Undisputed Era. If they ever do get called up, I feel like it would be better to have them as a group because Adam Cole is the most talented among them, but he's short and he's not jacked, and Vince would just hate that. So I feel like it's better for them to go as a group. So I don't know that if they're going to get called up, that splitting them up is the best thing, but we'll have to see where it goes. Presumably, we're going to keep stuff more or less status quo for the Dusty Classic. I think there's also going to be a women's Dusty Classic as well, which is going to be awesome because, again, NXT has the best women's division you're going to find anywhere, it seems like. So I would love to see that, and the Dusty Classic is really good because you'll get some teams that are legit tag teams, and you'll get some teams that are thrown together, and it creates a lot of interesting matchups and a lot of interesting dynamics. So I'm excited to see how those shape out as well. I'm excited to see who Finn's next opponent is. I'm excited to see Io Shirai back in the ring. I was a little bit surprised we didn't see her on the show at all, but she didn't have an opponent, so I get it. I'm excited to hopefully at some point see our tag team champions. That sure would be great. I'm excited to see where we're going with the North American title. That's felt a little bit stagnant with the going to Leon Ruff, then going back, and it ultimately being pointless. I'm excited to see Ciampa and Thatcher eventually have their fight pit match. Hopefully that happens. I'm excited to see Xia Li, Boa, and Sub-Zero again. That was a cool debut. I'm just generally excited, and I hope that you are too. Now, we're almost at the end here again. You can always find me on Twitter. I am at ZachNXT. That's at ZACHNXT. We're always talking about wrestling and other fun stuff over there. Sometimes not so fun stuff. Sometimes awful stuff. Sometimes stuff that makes you really mad. But that's okay. So, I will be back next week to talk about the fallout from New Year's Evil. I hope you'll join me then. In the meantime, that is my time. You have been fantastic. Thank you very much for listening.